was a quiet evening in early spring. The air was cool, but not cold, and a soft breeze came through the half-open window. The curtains moved slowly like they were breathing. The smell of rain was still in the air, that clean, fresh scent that always comes after a light shower. I sat by my desk, a cup of tea beside me, and looked at a blank page in my notebook. I had decided to write a letter. Not to a friend, not to anyone I knew, but to myself, to the person I would be in the future. It was an idea that had come to me suddenly, maybe because the evening felt peaceful, or maybe because I had been thinking too much about time. I turned on a small lamp, and warm light filled the room. The shadows became softer. I took my favorite pen, the one I used for journaling, and wrote the date at the top of the page. Then I paused. For a moment, I listened to the sounds around me, the quiet ticking of the clock, the soft hum of the city outside, the sound of a car passing in the distance. It was all very calm. It felt like the right moment to write something that mattered. Dear future me, I began. At first, the words came slowly. I wasn't sure what to say. How do you talk to yourself, someone who is you, but not yet? But after a few lines, the words began to flow more easily. I wrote about my day, about how I had gone for a walk after work, how the park was full of small white flowers, how I had seen a child chasing bubbles and laughing. I wrote about how small things like that made me smile. Then I wrote about my life right now, the things I enjoyed, the things that were hard, the things that I hoped would change. I wrote about my work, about my small apartment with its tiny balcony full of plants, and about the books I kept meaning to read. I wrote about how I sometimes felt lost, but also hopeful, as if something good was always just around the corner. As I wrote, the evening grew darker. The light from the lamp made the room feel even warmer. The tea beside me had gone cold, but I didn't care. I was lost in my thoughts. I told my future self to remember this moment, not because it was special in a big way, but because it was peaceful. I wanted her to remember that peace is something we create for ourselves, even in small ways, with a cup of tea, with quiet music, with a simple letter. I began to write about my dreams. They were not huge or impossible dreams, just small hopes that made life feel meaningful. I wanted to travel again, to see the ocean, to walk through old streets in a new city, to eat breakfast in a cafe where nobody knew my name. I wanted to learn another language, maybe French, maybe Italian. I wanted to write more, to take photos, to collect small pieces of beauty wherever I went. Then I wrote about gratitude. I wrote about my parents, my friends, my colleagues, and my neighbors. I wrote about how lucky I was to have people who cared about me. I wrote about my health, about the roof over my head, and about the fact that I could sit here tonight and write freely. I stopped for a moment and looked around my room. There was a bookshelf near the wall filled with novels and notebooks on the windowsill. A candle burned slowly. The air smelled faintly of vanilla. The clock ticked softly, reminding me that time was moving forward, second by second. I smiled and kept writing. Dear future me, I continued. I hope you still take time to notice little things. I hope you still smile at strangers and stop to look at the sky. I hope you haven't forgotten how to laugh. I wrote about how easy it is to forget the simple joys when life gets busy, when work takes over, when problems grow, when people come and go. I told my future self to pause sometimes and remember how much beauty there is in an ordinary day. Then I began to think about my childhood. I remember the small wooden desk where I used to do my homework, the bright yellow curtains in my old room, the sound of my mother calling me for dinner. I remember how I loved to draw, how I filled pages with colors, and how I once dreamed of being an artist. I wrote about that little girl and how, in many ways, she was still part of me. She was the one who loved stories, who looked at the stars and made wishes, who believed that anything was possible. I wanted my future self to remember her too, to keep that sense of wonder alive. The rain started again outside. I could hear the drops tapping softly against the window. I stopped writing and listened. There was something magical about the sound of rain. It always made me feel safe, as if the world outside had slowed down for a while. I looked at the paper again. My handwriting had filled almost 2 pages. I thought about what else I wanted to say. There was so much. So many small things that made up a life. I wrote about kindness, about being kind to others and to myself. I wrote that life was not always easy, but that kindness could make it softer. I wrote about mistakes and how they were part of growing. I wrote that I hoped my future self would forgive herself for the things she couldn't change. Then I wrote about courage, about taking chances, about not being afraid to begin again. I remembered a quote I had once read. Start where you are, use what you have, do what you can. It was simple, but true. As I wrote, I began to feel lighter. It was as if I was talking to a friend, someone who understood everything without judging. When I finished the last paragraph, I signed the letter with my name, and the date. I folded it carefully and placed it inside an envelope. On the front, I wrote in big letters, to be opened in 10 years. I placed the envelope inside a small wooden box on the shelf. In that box, I kept other precious things, old postcards, photos, ticket stubs from concerts, a seashell from the sea. Every object had a story. Every story had a memory. I sat back in my chair, took a deep breath, and looked around the room again. The candle was almost out. The rain was softer now, almost a whisper. The city lights shimmered faintly through the curtain. I felt peaceful, not excited, not sad, just peaceful. I realized that writing the letter had given me something I didn't expect. A sense of connection between who I was and who I would become. I didn't know what the future would bring, but I felt ready for it. I thought about how one day I would open this letter again. Maybe in a different place, maybe with different people in my life. Maybe I would smile at how young and uncertain I was when I wrote it. Maybe I would cry. Maybe both. But I knew one thing for sure. This letter would remind me of this quiet night, the sound of rain, the smell of tea, and the warm light on my desk. Before going to bed, I whispered softly, "Good night, future me. Take care of yourself." Then I turned off the lamp, and the room fell into gentle darkness. The rain stopped, the clock kept ticking. And somewhere in the silence, the future waited patiently, like a friend I hadn't met yet.